Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Google leverages Chrome's market share to push web security forward. Are we about to see zero-day exploits reclassified as weapons? And then the technical word is in. ZFS on Linux is ready. Then it's a great big batch of your questions, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 179 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on September 11th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, why, that's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You should go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Alan, are you feeling good today? You feeling like doing maybe a little bit of tech snapping?
Sure.
Yeah, why not? I mean, we're here, right? We might as well, since we both showed up. Well, good, because we've got a big show today. A lot has happened in the week.
We should remind people, next week we have two shows.
Two big shows next week. So if you want to show up for some double TechSNAP action back-to-back, sandwiched together in one epic live stream event, go over to jblive.tv. We'll probably start around 11 a.m. Pacific is when we usually kick that off. What's that, East?
That's 2.
2 o'clock. 2 o'clock Eastern. At jblive.tv, and also a really good chance to get extra emails in. So if you've got any questions you want to send to the TechSNAP show, send those over. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click the contact link, choose TechSNAP, and get them in, because we'll need twice as much email for next week's recording session. And then we'll release the second episode at the regular release interval that we would do. But Alan's going on. You're going to Bulgaria? Is that where you're going?
Yes, Sofia, Bulgaria, because that's where EuroBSDCon is this year.
Oh, okay. All right. Which also means there'll probably be a double BSD Now next week too, right?
Yeah, well, we don't do a whole show for BSD Now. We already recorded the interview, but yes, we'll be at the end of next week's show. We will record the intro and outro for the week after that's episode.
All right, Alan. Well, our first story sort of reminds us how once Google has a web browser that has a massive user adoption, they can sort of move things in certain directions. And I guess they're starting to kick off a transition. Is that right? What's going on?
Yeah, kind of. So Google's intent is to kill off all SSL certificates that are signed with an SHA-1 fingerprint. So specifically to say the SHA-1 cryptographic hash algorithm has been known to be considerably weaker than it was designed to be since 2005, and links to a paper by Bruce Schneier back in 2005, February of 2005, called Cryptanalysis of SHA-1. And basically, so for the last 9 years, we've known we shouldn't be using SHA-1. So why are we still using it? In particular, it's already been deprecated by NIST and by the CA/browser forum. And Google's trying to just speed up the replacement of the existing certificates and so on. And basically, their plan is that they say that's why Chrome will start the process of sunsetting all SHA-1 used as a certificate signature for HTTPS, starting with Chrome 39 this November. HTTPS sites whose certificate chain use any SHA-1 and have an expiration date that's past January 1st of 2017 will no longer be shown as fully trustworthy in Chrome's user interface. I think not on that post, but in one of the ones I linked at the bottom, I think the bottom one there, they show how they're basically going to gradually ratchet up the warning. At first, it'll just be like a little yellow thing beside the URL saying, it's not popping up the thing, this certificate's not trusted, you shouldn't go to this site. It's just, hey, there's, warning, you're using an old thing. And then gradually that'll ratchet up. I think their plan is at the highest phase, any certificate that is valid even into 2016 will start getting warnings. So basically, most people's certificates aren't affected by this yet because you buy your certificates 1 year at a time or 2 years at a time. So as long as your certificate's not having an expiration date past into 2017,
right?
But basically what you want to do is make sure that your certificates get requested with SHA 512 or SHA 256 or better from now on to prevent having any issues.
And
of course, this brings up its own set of issues because, it's never that easy to just switch. So the CA/browser forum, which is a group made up of Google, Mozilla, Microsoft, Apple, Opera, the people that make browsers, and most of the certificate authorities out there. And they set policies that the group goes by. And that's kind of how the browsers decide which certificate authorities go in the trust store. And, in 2010 and 2011, they've updated their standards. And remember, they got rid of all the 1024-bit certificates and got rid of MD5 hashing on it. And now they're proposing getting rid of SHA-1. Or rather specifically, they officially deprecated SHA-1 on certificates in 2011, but they said, the date when they were going to stop allowing them to be issued is further in the future than Google would like, and so they're trying to get people to update sooner. Even back in 2010, when they basically said after going into 2013. You should only use SHA-1 up until most clients support something like SHA-256.
Right.
But that's kind of where the problem is coming from. In particular, Google is proposing to add those increasingly severe warnings to kind of slowly push people towards replacing them. But upgrades could still be pretty complicated. In particular, Windows Server 2003 doesn't support any of the SHA-2 hashes.
Oh.
Even with the latest service pack, it only kind of partially supports it.
You mean like an IIS?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's not good.
As a client, Windows XP Service Pack 2 does not support SHA-256. If you have Service Pack 3, it does.
Okay.
Now, I think that only applies to Internet Explorer. I think if you're using Mozilla, then the NSS cert thing they bundle with like Firefox or Chrome, it'll work fine. But if you're still using Windows XP Service Pack 2, you're probably also still using Internet Explorer, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. And the other problem is even Android. They added support for SHA-256 in Android 2.3, but a lot of people's phones still run 2.2 because that was kind of that cutoff mark where your phone was either got upgraded or didn't.
Yeah.
So all those people running around with 2.2 won't be able to read or verify SHA-256 certificates. So valid certificates will appear invalid because their client can't understand them.
I wonder how many phones that still is.
Yeah. And just how many computers running Windows XP, depending on the site, it might not be a big deal, but if you have a lot of clients running pirated Windows XP in China, then that could be a bigger problem for you to upgrade than it would be for some site that's, all of my users are running Firefox or Chrome. Nobody ever comes to my website in Internet Explorer in the first place, right? So, it kind of gets complicated. So to trying to work around this, a couple of companies have kind of working on this idea of running two certificates at the same time.
Oh.
A newer certificate for clients that support it so that they take advantage of the extra security features, but a backwards compatible one for people that are running Windows XP Service Pack 2 or whatever. Currently, Apache now has support for it, and Cloudflare is working on adding it to Nginx, and Yahoo is working on adding it to the Apache traffic server.
That could be an interesting solution as a temporary, or if nothing else.
Yes, although it does point, does that make people susceptible to a downgrade attack, where a man in the middle somehow causes it that you get the old certificate instead of the new one,
right?
And then
yes.
you get the.
I think it probably does.
Then
doesn't
they can attack you.
Yeah.
However, if your browser is newer, it won't accept the older certificate, maybe, right? Because like if it's Chrome, it's going to complain that hey, the certificate is old, and
right.
they're like, no, it should be new. So the whole point of this is to transition as quickly as possible. The problem is Windows Server 2003 and Windows XP and Android. So GlobalSign, one of the big CAs, has a compatibility matrix for SHA-256. And they specifically mention, OS 10, only 10.5 and newer. So if you're running like 10.4, you might not have it. You need iOS 3 or newer, Android 2 or 2.3, BlackBerry 5, Windows XP Service Pack 3, Windows Phone 7, or Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 2 with certain hot fixes kind of partially maybe supports it. So the minimum version you require for a browser is Chrome version 26, which actually seems relatively new compared to some of these other ones here.
Mm-hmm.
Firefox has supported it since version 1.5, which is just before I started using Firefox, and that would have been almost 8 years ago or more.
Yeah, it's a long time
1.5 is a long time ago.
Yeah.
Internet Explorer 6, that's with XP Service Pack 3. Conquer 3.5.6, Mozilla 1.4, Netscape 1.7, Opera 9, or Safari 3, which is the one that shipped with OS 10 10.5. And they go on to talk that, Apache 2.0.63, as long as you have OpenSSL 0.9.80, and so on and so on. Specifically, they mentioned IBM's Domino server currently does not support SHA-2 at all. And the IBM HTTP server, you need version 8.5, which is the one that came with Domino 9. And they go on to list lots of other stuff. Some of the interesting ones are the code signing stuff. When you get a signed executable or a signed driver for Windows, executables, you can do SHA-2 hashing algorithms on an exe file in Windows XP, Service Pack 3, Vista, 7, 8, etc. However, for the kernel drivers, only Windows 8 supports SHA-2. And as far as the VBA macros for Office stuff, no support at all in Office 2003, 2007, or 2010. However, they do support it in Office 2013 on Windows 7 and 8.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So, Google...
and apparently IBM ZOS version 1 release 10 for mainframes.
ZOS. Never heard it called that before. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody call it that.
Like Zeos?
Yeah.
What would you normally call it?
Yeah. Yeah, Zeos. Well, Alan, I think what's interesting here is we're always a little curious, a little cautious. What's Google going to do once they have an important control in the browser market? But this seems like a good Google move.
Right. This isn't really them doing anything that the CA forum isn't already kind of planning to do.
And Microsoft themselves and others. I mean, it's, yeah.
Right. It's just Google being like, well, our browser is a little more geared toward power users, and so let's, have them make it easier to tell when a site should be updating.
I do like that.
I think Google is just more worried about this than other people.
Good. They should be.
They've been the ones that have been the target of a lot of this stuff, right?
Yeah, that's true, and they will always be.
In particular, they've in a later article that we'll get to in a minute, they talk about things like they estimate that the cost in computer power to brute force an SHA-1 hash, right now it would cost about $2 million. And so that's kind of out of reach of most people. But not really out of reach of a nation state.
No.
Per se.
No. Or even really a company with an agenda.
Right. But by 2018, they estimate the cost will be under $120,000, which puts it right in the realm of, a Russian crime syndicate that why having a real SSL certificate for PayPal could steal a lot of money.
Right. Yeah, very much so.
And then, by the year 2021, they figured it would cost $25,000, and then, universities could do it on a research budget just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so on.
All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
Lots still.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Lay it on me.
So it's nice to see these steps being taken with plenty of time to spare, right? Like Google's not targeting anything really before 2017.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you have until 2017 to fix this problem. We're not rushing anybody.
Yeah.
Because, we have to wait for Windows XP to die.
Yeah. I'm ready now.
Which is basically the opposite of what we saw with MD5, right? In the past, the move away from MD5 was a lot less smooth. It basically... Nobody was really in a big hurry to do it until people were making rogue certificates by finding MD5 collisions and being able to have a private key that matched that of a real certificate authority and be able to issue certificates all over the place. Right. So I have a link to that old article on the MD5 collision and how to take over as one of the certificate authorities.
Oh, yeah. Great.
So we saw the CA/browser forum similarly disallowed all 1024-bit certificates back in 2010, right? They said starting in December 31st of 2010, after that, no more certificates that aren't at least 2048-bit. And they said that no certificate is allowed to have an expiration date later than December 31st, 2013 if it has a 1024-bit certificate. So anything that was good longer than that needed to be reissued with a stronger bit. However, when Mozilla finally pulled the plug on 2014 bit. What I meant was 1024. It just happens to be the right characters, and the typo ended up making it the year. Anyway, Mozilla finally pulled the plug on 1024-bit certificates, I think just a couple days ago, with the latest Firefox. They found that there were still 107,000 valid certificates that were using 1024-bit still, that are no longer trusted because of the change in the Mozilla. Jeez. Even though those have been deprecated for 9 months, they were still out there.
Yeah,
people had 3 years and 9 months of warning, and they still didn't fix it.
Right.
And so the only way to make it happen is eventually to pull it out, right?
That's what she said.
So then I have 2 more links here. The first is from one of the guys at SSL Labs. The website you can go in and put in your web address, and it'll check how good your SSL is configured.
Yeah.
He has a breakdown of what you need to know about this, right? It's SHA-1 deprecation, what you need to know, including what they're doing. They're going to make it, you can't get an A+ if you're still using SHA-1, and they talk about how to solve the problem and so on.
Okay.
So that's a very good read. And then also over at conclone.com, they have why Google is hurrying the web to kill SHA-1. And they walk through a lot of that stuff as well, and talk about the server supporting being able to have the backwards compatible certificates and all that interesting stuff. So lots of good reading there if you want to get into more about it. And it covers, what you need to do.
Right.
For example, the Scale Engine certificate we have for our website, that expires early in 2015. So when that expires, we'll make sure that it has SHA 256 or something.
Yeah.
And, too bad for people running Windows XP Service Pack 2.
Well, yeah, come on.
That's a low enough percentage on our website that it's okay. But on some other website, that might be a problem.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to depend on your user base. Yep. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to start to get more okay.
Part of the thing is currently 90% of websites are using SSL, and the most common one is SHA-1 still.
Yeah. You know what we all need, Alan? A little more hardware in our life, maybe a little more computing power. And a place you can do that is over at ixsystems.com/TechSNAP, where not only do they have amazing systems, but they're powered by those incredible Intel Xeon processors. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. And Alan, they've got the hookup.
They just put out the press release that, I heard about the new Xeon processors on like Monday or Tuesday. And the next day, IX is like, all right, here's our new line of servers all using these processors.
They must have like the bat line to Intel. That's awesome.
Well, they do. They work very closely with Intel.
Yeah. So these look really great. The new E5 version 3 product family. They look like
these
monsters.
Are based on, if you remember, we talked about the new i7 Extremes that were coming out last week.
Yeah, last episode.
These are the server edition based on the same platform.
Wow.
So you get DDR4 with ECC, so you're getting like 68 gigabytes a second of memory transfer speed. They have 2 classes of the Xeons coming out. They have the E5 16XX.
Okay.
That'll be your workstation processor. Intel's using a different term than workstation for them, to separate them from, someone that needs an i7 or whatever versus someone that needs a Xeon.
Mm-hmm.
But then they have the server ones, which are your E5 26XX. And they have a complete range of processors there from, the ones that cost $200, right? Your low end, you get, I think, 4 cores.
Oh, okay.
Have the table
plus
here.
hyper-threading.
Yeah, well, no. On the cheapest one, you don't get hyper-threading.
Oh, really? Okay, so it's just...
So
how will you make do? How will you make do? 4 cores.
So, yes, your lowest one is about $200, and that's a E5 2603 V3.
Wow.
Which has 6 cores and no hyper-threading, and it runs at 1.6 gigahertz. And doesn't have turbo boost.
Okay.
But that's the cheapest one, basically. Then you can go up, you can decide, hey, I want the cheapest one that you can. Then they have low voltage versions as well. So they have a complete range, but you can ban anywhere from 4 cores with hyperthreading or 6 cores without hyperthreading, and anywhere from 1.6 gigahertz up to 3.2 gigahertz. Or no, 3.4 gigahertz.
3.4 gigahertz.
Yeah. And
wow.
basically, you have a price scale of anywhere between $200 to $4,100.
That's the one I want.
For the E5 2699 V3. 18 cores with hyperthreading, so 36 threads.
Oh.
And when it's an E5 26 something something, that means that it's dual socket. So you put 2 in.
Oh, yep. That's
so
what I want.
each cost $4,100.
That's okay.
We put the 2 in there, and that would give you 72 cores at 2.3 gigahertz with 45 megs of cache on each of the 2 processors.
Oh, 45 megs?
Yeah, 45 megs of cache on the top end ones. And that's DDR4 at 2133 megahertz RAM.
Man.
So that's like beefy. But for the more regular range, the E5 2620 V3, which I have a bunch of the 2620s and 2620 V2s, they're in the $400 range, and you get 6 cores plus hyperthreading, so 12 threads at 2.4 gigahertz with 15 megs of cache.
I want all of it.
Comparing that, the E5 2620, the first one, was 6 cores at 2.0 gigahertz. The V2 was 6 at 2.1, and now the V3 is actually the same 6 cores, but at 2.4 gigahertz in the same or slightly smaller power envelope.
Mm.
And for the same price, importantly.
I tell you what.
You're getting more gigahertz for the same price. On top of the fact that just the general architecture improvements have increased the performance as well.
No, it makes me want to build a whole new system. And you know where I would go? ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Because ixsystems.com/TechSNAP is a landing page you can go to learn more about what IX Systems can offer, why you might want to check them out, including their ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source, 11 key traits you must absolutely demand from your provider. Why not go get a system that's built by people that are already familiar with this new set of chips from Intel, and they can build you an incredible system that can scale to your needs from a small business all the way up to large enterprise. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. And a big thanks to IX Systems for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And great work.
And, they have the whole span, just like Intel, right? You can get a small machine or a giant monster.
Gosh, every time you talk about those high-end processors, I'm like, there must be some reason I need that. We encode video. That sounds legit. Okay, on our next story is actually kind of picking up on a thread that we've speculated about a lot. What's going to happen in this crazy market that's developing for zero-day exploits? Black market, gray market, governments are getting involved, mafias are getting involved, Bitcoin enthusiasts are involved, and
yeah, we've seen quite a different range of subsets of this market, right? We saw things like VuPen, where we'll only sell to certain governments and certain companies, and then we saw other places, and we see the places like that, the forums that sell things like the black hole exploit kit, right? And they'll sell it for $100 to anybody. Or VuPen's like, well, for $100,000, you can have our catalog and see what you might be able to buy from us.
Right. So this may be changing?
Possibly.
How so?
There's this thing called the Wassenaar Agreement.
Sounds
catchy. I
catchy.
think I pronounced that right. But basically, it's an arms trading agreement that deals with when it's illegal to sell weapons to other countries and so on.
Okay.
And specifically deals with what are called dual-use technologies, right? Which is consumer off-the-shelf stuff you can buy that might also have applications to a military, right? Like encrypted radios.
Or a laptop.
Yeah. Well, laptop's kind of a loose definition, but yeah, dual-use technologies are things that are could have a completely legitimate use, but also have a more military use.
So the Wassenaar Agreement... The Wassenaar Agreement on Export Controls for Conventional Arms and Dual-Use Goods and Technologies is a multilateral export control regime with 41 participating states, and I think the U.S. is in there.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. And so VuPen and some of the others that are selling zero-day exploits are now following the rules of that agreement because they're considering their zero days to be dual-use technologies. And so they say going forward, they will sell to approved government agencies in approved countries only. So that means they won't be selling to private companies directly anymore or to unapproved governments. So the latest version of the agreement, which just came out, now specifically lists zero-day exploits, backdoors, and so on as regulated and export-controlled dual-use technologies.
Oh, interesting.
Previously, the U.S. hadn't recognized that most recent edition, but that's all changing coming later this month, according to the Federal Register notice. So the U.S. government put out a notice saying, be aware that the rules on this agreement are changing, and now 0 days, exploits, and backdoors are considered weapons, and, you'll be guilty of weapon smuggling or arms dealing if you are selling to unapproved people. The notice states that the U.S. Will be adopting changes to the list of dual-use items. The change to the list was made in December of 2013.
So my question to you would be, where do you draw the line in terms of what would be a weapon, what is just an exploit tool, and things like that, right? So,
well, yeah, it brings up a lot of questions. The one is like, where does the government draw the line on dual use?
Yeah,
are security tools like Nmap.
Perfect
that's
example.
Just a scanner. It's not actually exploiting anything.
I can use Telnet.
The government not understand any of that before, right?
Well, look at the way they referred to wget during the Snowden leaks as a hacker extraction tool.
As opposed to a website downloader.
You could, by that definition, you could call Telnet a hacker probing tool.
Yes, but I just want to, if I ever steal a bunch of documents like that, I'm going to go find an old version of GetRight.
Yeah, buddy.
And use that just so that I just want to hear someone call GetRight a hacking tool.
Oh, man, that would be so worth it, Alan. That'd be great.
I guess technically ARIA 2 is basically the same thing now.
Yeah, but what I miss about GetRight
is awesome, especially when in college for a short while I had dual internet connections.
Yeah, buddy.
And so I would use multi-segmental downloading and manually route some of the connections over the other connection.
Back when I had dial-up, the only way you would go on a big download project was with GetRight. And I remember...
yep. I was that, and I think FileZilla for FTP downloads let you do a rate limit. Yeah. But no, I was using GetRight specifically because I had dial-up, and I was downloading these large 350 megabyte files. And so if I didn't speed limit it to 1 kilobyte a second while I was trying to work, my SSH session would be too laggy to do any work.
Yeah.
But when I was AFK, I'd turn the speed limit off and max out like 5 kilobytes a second.
Yeah.
Because even at 5 point something kilobytes a second, it would take 26 hours to download 350 megabytes.
GetRight,
which I can now do in like literally a couple of seconds.
GetRight had a lot of incarnations, but it was the first shareware I paid for.
Mm-hmm.
Before then, I often was a jerk, because I was young, and then GetRight finally was the one that made me change my ways and say, you know what, this is worth supporting.
The interesting thing is that almost every kind of like downloading interface is derived from the interface they came up with.
Yeah, it is, even today.
Yeah,
and you might not know it if you hadn't seen it.
uTorrent looks exactly like GetRight.
I'm looking at it right now. It looks exactly like it. That's crazy.
Part of that was the element you could draw with Visual Basic. Well, it wasn't written in Visual Basic because, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, so anyways, so what gets defined as dual use could have major ramifications here for people in our industry.
Well, yeah, because all of a sudden, and specifically when it talks about distributing it, right? So it's like using an exploit isn't technically the problem under this agreement. It's selling it.
Yeah.
But I guess nobody sells Nmap, but is SourceForge liable for distributing Nmap from their download mirrors? Yeah, we'll have to see what's going on there. But I imagine that's not the spirit of this particular agreement, but, with 41 countries being involved, one of them has got to not understand the difference between Nmap and a zero-day exploit for Windows.
Well, I wonder if in a way, isn't it in Vupen's interest to make these? I don't want to say calibered, but by classifying these as essentially weapons, they can ask for so much more money, right? It makes them so much more valuable.
Although, at the same time, the government restricting who Vupen can sell to makes less competition for the government, so the government maybe doesn't have to pay Vupen as much anymore.
But they're guaranteed almost to be
someone else.
But I bet you at the same time, there's a tit for tat there.
But guaranteed access to everything. Right?
Well, and they're guaranteed to have Vupen's guaranteed to have a well-paying customer for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially what the government's come in and says, well, we don't want to have to pay the competitive price for these exploits. So what we're going to do
is sell them to anyone else because they'll be more use to us if no one else knows about them.
Right. So,
but yeah.
But VuPen's like, all right, well, we're in.
VuPen is the one in France, if I'm not incorrect. I'm forgetting. Pretty sure VuPen's in France, and one of the other ones is in Malta. I don't
know either, Alan. But there you go.
It'll be interesting to see what comes of this. Although we'd rather the government, when buying these, wasn't keeping them for their own uses instead of having them be fixed.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, sir. Any other thoughts on that story?
That particular one? No.
All right. Well, we got more stories coming up. But first, I'll tell you about DigitalOcean. Please go over to DigitalOcean.com right now and arm yourself with the knowledge of our promo code SNAPSeptember. I'll tell you more about that here in just a second. But I want to tell you a little bit about DigitalOcean because they're pretty damn impressive. DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up a cloud server. Users can create a cloud server in less than 55 seconds. And pricing plans start only $5 per month for 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, a CPU, and a terabyte of transfer, connected to Tier 1 bandwidth because DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, and a brand new one in London. In fact, they're turning up IPv6 all over the place, too. They have a blog post about some of the London locations, I believe, that have IPv6. They have it up on their blog right now, including recent announcements about Core OS. Never been a better time to experiment around with Core OS. And if you're in the Amsterdam region, somewhere over there, why not? And they have private networking. That's a great feature as well. That's awesome for backups or if you have a back-end database. Their snapshot and backup system makes it crazy easy to protect your system before you make any big upgrades or changes. And 160,000 developers deploy to DigitalOcean all the time because DigitalOcean makes integrating with your workflow super crazy easy with their straightforward API. In fact, DigitalOcean has one of the best control panels in the industry. It's intuitive and easy to use, but they provide power users the capability to extend that control panel beyond just what you see on the web with that API. And you're seeing the development community run with that big time. Major desktops now have automatic integrated tools you can use as a DigitalOcean Droplet user to manage your Droplet. It's awesome. They've got scripts you can use. You can integrate with Puppet. It's so slick. And I love, at the end of the day, the value of it all. If you go over to DigitalOcean.com right now and use the promo code SNAPSeptember when you check out, you'll get a $10 credit. Well, guess what? The basic DigitalOcean drop is $5 a month, and I can tell you from my own personal experience, you'll be impressed with the distance you get out of $5 a month. And a big part of it really is high-end CPUs, and KVM's a great virtualizer, and the SSD drives. They bring all that together, connect it to great bandwidth, and it's amazing what you can do for $5 a month. But if you use the promo code SNAPSeptember, you're going to get 2 months for free. They also have hourly pricing available if you just need to scale up for a project or do some testing. A lot of great options over at DigitalOcean.com. So head over to DigitalOcean.com and use the promo code SNAPSeptember when you can't believe it's September. SNAPSeptember when you check out. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP show. Snap September. Wow. And pretty soon it's going to be Snap October, and that is going to blow my mind. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Woo. And speaking, so we're doing a double recording next week. At some point in October, I'm going to have to do a double recording because I'm going to be going to Ohio Linux Fest.
Yep.
So we're going to have to record for me for once ahead of time. How about that, Alan? Huh? Look at me getting out of the house. Or out of the studio. Okay. Number one question I get all the time on the Linux Action Show when it comes to disk storage is, if I'm not going to use ButterFS, Chris, can I use ZFS? Is it production ready? And I always go, I don't know. I should ask Alan. So, Alan, what's the word?
So the word here comes from one of the most prolific developers of ZFS on Linux.
Richard Yao?
Yeah. He's got the second most commits to the repository.
Okay.
Behind the guys, I think, from the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, where the government is using it.
Recently joined the Cluster HQ team, too, it looks like.
Yes.
That's cool.
And he's got his breakdown of, the question is ZFS on Linux, quote, stable, quote. And so he asks the question, what does stable mean? And then tries to break it down. So specifically talks about what's going on with it. So in particular, he says ZFS on Linux is now officially production ready. The key features thereafter are that the key ZFS data integrity features work on the Linux system just like they work on all the other platforms. So you get the same guarantees from ZFS about the data storage that you would get on FreeBSD or Lumos or whatever. The ZFS runtime stability on Linux is comparable to that of other file systems. There are certain exceptions, but in general, it's on par with using ext4 or whatever, as far as the chance that it'll crash your computer or something. The bigger difference there is that ZFS will recover nicely when that does happen, and ext4 maybe not so much.
Oh, womp womp.
In particular, ZFS on Linux is at near feature parity with ZFS on other platforms. It lags behind a little bit, but it's getting there. Specifically, ZFS on Linux doesn't lose data, right? Because it's the regular ZFS that's already in use elsewhere, and then just porting it to Linux. It means that they don't have to worry so much about bugs in the core ZFS code that are going to cause data loss, because those have already been worked out over the course of the last 11 years that people have been using.
So that's
ZFS.
a key point, isn't it? That is all.
ZFS on Linux is not re-implementing ZFS.
Right.
It's taking the existing core
It's not in a
open
vacuum.
ZFS code and just dealing with the Solaris porting layer to make it work on Linux.
Right, okay.
The other things they had definition for stable, obviously, are changes to the disk format are forward compatible. So meaning that you'll be able to upgrade from your current version of ZFS to future versions without having to rebuild the file system from scratch.
Hey-o.
And the other one is that updates are always flawless, right? When you do the zpool upgrade, it's not going to bork anything, right? So that you can keep moving forward and having the features, and you're not going to have to start over. So that's what makes it production ready. Before now, it's like, well, we don't know. We might change something, and then you'll have to start over. That's not so good for a server. But now that they're sure that that's not going to happen, they don't have to worry about that so much. So up until now, it's mostly been the on Linux part of ZFS on Linux that's been the question, right? OpenZFS, which is the open source fork from Oracle, that's used in Lumos, FreeBSD, SmartOS, and everywhere else, including ZFS on Linux on OS 10, or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Or OpenZFS on OS X, has been stable for quite a few years, right? It's been considered stable in FreeBSD since like 9.0, and that's a couple of years now. Well, technically it's been stable since 7, but it's been really good since 9, and so you got quite a few years under the belt now. I think that was 2010 when it was like considered rock solid. So good number of years. People have been using it for a long time, and it's not having problems. The first, so data loss can be defined as the occurrence of one of two events. The first is that you tell it to store some information on the disk, and it doesn't do it. That doesn't happen. And the second one is that when you attempt to read information that was successfully stored on the disk, you get back some garbledness or nothing at all. And not only does that not happen in ZFS, but if something did happen on the physical disk to cause the corruption there, ZFS can deal with that, whereas other file systems can't. Right? Your ext4 would just give you the garbled data and not realize, whereas ZFS would be like, hey, that's not right. I'm going to recover it from the redundancy and give you back the right information. Or an error if it can't get it, which is better than getting gobbledygook, right? And then the other one they have here is the ZFS on Linux kernel driver performs the same block device operations as its counterparts on other platforms. As a consequence, its ability to ensure data integrity is equivalent to its counterparts on other platforms, and this ability far exceeds that of any other Linux file system for directly attached storage.
Now that's almost the point. I mean, so I think as what I always worry about is like I guess I have worried that ZFS in some way on Linux is almost running in user space, like it's not in the kernel. Is that?
But it's in the kernel. That's why they can't ship it per se. Now there used to be a port of ZFS in user space.
Right.
It's called ZFS Fuse or something.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking
that
of.
died in 2010. That's not, nobody's using that. So no, this is right in the kernel, and that's why it's you have to go to ZFS on Linux.
This is a pretty compelling argument, I would have to say.
Yeah. Well, the more compelling argument is at the bottom here.
Okay.
So then they also detail what's missing currently. So ZFS on Linux is currently missing 9 of the newest features in OpenZFS. Right, these are most of these are the new feature flags that have come out.
Yeah, okay.
And that you have to be running cutting edge version of FreeBSD to get some of these as it is. Although 9.3 just came out and they'll have most, and 10.1 I think will have all of these, and that should come out in the next couple of months anyway. But in particular, ZFS on Linux is currently missing LZ4 compression, which is a big one that's been around for a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a little surprised they're that far behind. But they have part of the problem is that they kind of diverged a little bit when they were doing all their changes. They weren't kind of keeping the fact that they're going to have to pull in more changes from upstream in mind. And but anyway, the space map histograms, which is it greatly improves the speed of ZFS when you have heavy fragmentation, which used to be a problem in the V28. They also have a feature flag that keeps track, or sorry, a system that keeps track of when you enable the feature flag. So when you turned on LZ4 compression, and it can also do that per data set, so that if you turn on LZ4 compression but never used it, you can still mount the pool on a system that doesn't understand LZ4. So in particular, this means if you made a pool on a FreeNAS or something, and turned on the compression but never actually used it, you would still be able to import that pool on Linux that doesn't understand it if it also had this other feature that's missing. But going forward, it'll make it a little easier to have compatibility between the different versions, because they're not quite in lockstep, right? Like Illumos gets the feature first, and then it goes into FreeBSD, and the Linux guys are a little far behind. Although there's separate project where they're going to have a common OpenZFS repo that isn't tied to Illumos, where we're going to try to get this happening even faster. And then obviously some of the really new features like whole birth, which is keeping track of when some sparseness opens up in the file system, and that will allow improved replication performance. It won't have to replicate the fact that there's a hole there if it knows that that hole existed last time, so it doesn't need to send it again.
Very clever.
Yeah, because basically replication worked well, although it had trouble keeping track of what was deleted, right? And would have to re-replicate that to make sure it got deleted on the other side, whereas now it keeps track better. And then ZFS bookmarks, which is what's required to be able to resume a ZFS replication when it gets interrupted. That's the feature I've been waiting for. I was promised by the end of this year. So,
you think?
When I talk to Matt in 2 weeks, he better have good news, or
or he's gonna get the TechSNAP shame.
Yeah. And then they said there are 9 other features that are currently missing from in ZFS on Linux from mainline Linux, but these ones are more general, less specific kind of things.
Okay.
Things like is missing integration with iSCSI, because I don't think Linux has an iSCSI daemon built into the kernel. FreeBSD doesn't have this yet either, although we recently got an iSCSI kernel daemon, so maybe we'll hook this up, but that's something that's still just being thought about. So
yeah.
That one's not a big deal, obviously.
Okay.
Integration with containers. Linux doesn't really have something that really equates to zones or jails, so it makes sense that they don't have that yet.
Yeah.
Bootloader integration kind of fits as well. Linux doesn't have a bootloader per se. Like, you just use Grub or one of the other loaders.
I'm
like
all about Lilo. No, I'm kidding.
Or whatever. Right. Whereas, in FreeBSD, there's the FreeBSD bootloader, right? Which has a ZFS component and can boot off ZFS. Now, Grub 2 has a ZFS module that works pretty well. Actually, that's what PCBSD uses. So, that's not that big of a problem currently. And they go on to list a bunch of the other minor things. But the big news here is that the current release is 0.6.3, and they expect to release 0.6.4, which will have a bunch of these problems solved. I think they'll have LZ4 maybe by 0.6.4. I'm not sure. The plan is to continue performing 0.6.x releases with distribution maintainers doing backports until they can finish the one other problem they have is currently dev ZFS, the device, the IOCTL interface, isn't stabilized. Whereas on FreeBSD or Illumos or whatever, when you upgrade your system to a newer version and you get the newer ZFS code, it can still operate on the backwards compatible or the backwards pool. Whereas currently on Linux, you have to keep your kernel version of ZFS and your userland tools, like the zpool and ZFS commands, in sync. Whereas on BSD and Illumos, you don't have to because they have a stable IOCTL. Anyway, their plan is to fix that as well. Once they finish that and basically make that stabilized, they will release 1.0. So they just need to stabilize the API for the tools talking to the kernel, and they will be at 1.0.
What do you think that is like time-wise? Is that maybe by the end of the year? Is that
probably not the end of the year, but early next year?
Okay.
But basically, they're saying we're all the way there, except for there's a little bit of an issue when you're upgrading your version of the tools to keep you got to keep the kernel and the userland in sync, where that's not as big of an issue on Illumos or BSD or whatever. But once they stabilize that interface, that will be 1.0.
Gotcha.
And then they will do 1.x with 1.x.y maintenance releases that will have backported fixes and will go to the Linux kernel stable maintainers.
But it almost sounds like it's not even... Boy, it sounds dumb to say this out loud, but do you have to wait for 1.0 if you're going to run ZFS on Linux? It doesn't really...
No, basically what they're saying is ready now,
I think so.
This one little niggling thing that technically meets the definition of stable.
Yeah.
So the code is stable,
but
it's just the interface, if you're going to write your own tools to interface with the kernel or something, isn't stable yet. Or
so
it's still subject to change. So what they're saying is that it's ready to go with 0.6.4 that'll be out soon.
Should I... when I reload my laptop, should I try ZFS on a laptop? Or do you think it's just...
My laptop runs ZFS. I'm running PCBSD, all ZFS with snapshots and boot environments. So I can actually...
Yeah, that would be nice.
Basically, I have the ability to dual boot different versions of FreeBSD with the same home directory and stuff.
I guess the snapshot thing, I'm going to think about it. I'll think about it. Might as well. I mean, people, somebody's got to try it and let the people know how it goes, Alan. Somebody's got to do it.
It is, I don't know, it's been flawless for me.
Huh, okay.
I know what I'm doing, but...
Right. If you get a weird phone call from me in the middle of the night before I'm trying to do a Linux action show, I might need you to answer it. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No.
All right. And if you're out there running ZFS on Linux, we'd like to hear your stories. And any particulars about your details, about how you have the volume set up, pool set up, how large the storage is, the type of data, if you're doing dedupe, if you're doing compression, send it in, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or click the contact link, because we have 2 episodes next week. So
up until now, we've basically told people don't do dedupe. It requires more RAM than you have.
Yeah.
Although now with the newer Intel processors where you can put a terabyte of RAM in a machine, that's not so concerned.
I bet people do it, though. I feel like dedupe...
There are some people that do it, and the biggest risk is if you don't have enough RAM, if something goes wrong with the pool when you're trying to re-import it, it will sit there and try to load that whole table into RAM. And if it can't, it won't finish importing.
I wonder if anybody would be willing to share any war stories, too. That could be fun.
Yeah. Well, we had some great ones with Josh on BSD Now.
Yeah, on BSD Now.
Josh Petzel came and told us a couple.
All right. Well,
for other war stories, the week that we're off, that episode of BSD Now has some great war stories from the FreeBSD cluster admin team.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so look forward to that in 2 weeks.
Cluster war stories?
Something like that.
That's something else. All right, well, I'll tell you about Ting. Go over to techsnap.ting.com right now. Techsnap.ting.com will take $25 off your first Ting device. If you already have a Ting-compatible device, well, techsnap.ting.com will give you a $25 credit. You're like, oh, that's interesting. But let me tell you, that actually paid for more than my first month of Ting service. So it's actually a huge deal. TechSNAP.ting.com. Go find out why Ting is different. They have a savings calculator there on their front page. When you click that, go into that. And I want you to enter in not what you pay for. So like if you're buying like 1,000 minutes a month, but you're only using 600 of those minutes on average, put 600 in there, right? Same with the data, same with the text, all that. Plug your information in there, and then just see how much you would save over 2 years. That'll give you a concept of the value of Ting. Well, that's a critical aspect of Ting. It's so much more than that. Ting also has no-hold customer support. You call them at 1-855-TING-FTW, and a real Canadian, boom, answers the phone. They're empowered to solve your problem. It's a core aspect of what their company focuses on, and it's a key differentiator for Ting. On top of that, they've got an amazing dashboard that lets you manage your account. I have 3 phones right now, and I was just curious last night, which one of these 3 phones is costing me the most money, right? I'm in businessman mode last night. I'm like, what's costing me money? I log into the Ting dashboard, and it's so straightforward. I have nicknames on each phone, so I know exactly where things are at. I can also set alerts if I want to, and I'm only paying for what I use. It's a flat $6 a month. And then it's the usage for each line on top of that. Plus any cut the man's going to take for taxes, but that's pretty much nothing because the Ting service is such a good value already that the taxes aren't that much. So it's kind of amazing. I'll tell you right now, maybe what I'll do is I'll put it on our faces for a second. I will go log in to my account right now, for my Ting account, to show you what I'm going to pay for 3 phones. So right now, my current bill for Ting is $34. $34 for 3 phones. Now, how about that? That is not bad at all. And that is right there. And on my account, we have 2 Android phones and an iPhone. Ting has all kinds of great options, including they're now going to soon be supporting the iPhone 5S and 5C. And the 5S, yeah, I know the iPhone 6 was just announced, but you know what? Like 2 days ago, the iPhone 5S was a great phone. Still is a great phone. It's got the Touch ID. That's awesome. And they're going to have it on the Ting network soon. You can sign up to get notifications about that. Of course, they've got a whole great line of phones. They've got the 5
plus
today.
The release of the 6 probably means the 5 will be slightly cheaper now.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? Is you can get a pretty good phone for a great value. Here's another great example. If you're in IT support, if you are responsible for an infrastructure for servers, sometimes you've got to get connected. You're on the road. You've just got to get into the server and manage things. But you don't always need that. This is where I think, particularly for the TechSNAP audience, the Ting model really works. The Sierra 4G LTE hotspot, $74. You own it. And then it's $6 a month for the hotspot, Alan. And then you just get data when you need it.
Exactly. Like, currently with my plan, I'm paying a monthly fee to have this much bandwidth because I might need it.
Right, exactly.
Right. Because I've had to SSH into a server and change some sysctls from my cell phone on a train. And I need the ability to be sure I can do that. But I'm paying for, all this data all the time when most months I use like literally 10 megabytes.
Well, and if you go to techsnap.ting.com, you get the Sierra 4G LTE hotspot for $74. That's it. No contract. No contract to terminate, no monthly service besides the $6 flat line. But here's the crazy thing, you guys. If you go to techsnap.ting.com, you're going to get the $25 credit. So you get a 25. You might be able to use this thing for months before you ever have to pay for the service, right? Because if you're going to get the 20 and you get the $25 credit. It's pay for what you use data. This is going to last forever if you don't need it except for during emergencies. And if you do need it, or use the hell out of it, right? You get $25 of usage for free. Have at it, Haas. TechSnap.ting.com. Go get yourself a $74 hotspot, and you're done. Plus the monthly $6. $25, though. Boom! I think that'd be great for the TechSNAP audience. TechSnap.ting.com. And a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Alan, we were just talking about that there BSD Now show that you are involved in from time to time, and a little birdie told me before we started the show that episode 54 just went up on the site, and this happens to have a walkthrough of a desktop environment that a few folks have wanted to see, doesn't it?
Yes, it's got Lumina and talks a bit about getting Lumina on Linux as well, and Lumina on vanilla FreeBSD. It's in the FreeBSD ports tree, so you don't have to be using PCBSD to get it. And they are also interested in some people that might want to try porting it to OpenBSD. Basically, there's one source file you have to make a couple of minor changes to, and it should just work on OpenBSD and NetBSD. And they really love to hear from people doing that as well.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool because it's Chris.
There is a port coming to Linux as well, even though that this DE was specifically designed to be one that wasn't full of Linux Linux dependencies. It doesn't mean it doesn't work perfectly fine on Linux.
Okay, so it's Chris talking to his brother Ken, and so it's the developer.
It's a full interview, so I'm there too. But yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you were there. I watched it. I had no idea you were there.
Oh, sorry. There's a tutorial.
Oh, that's the part I watched.
Those two did that on last Monday.
Yeah, that's the part I watched.
And then we also did an interview with Ken where we actually asked him questions in a regular style.
Oh, that's the part I didn't see, Alan. So I need to watch the complete episode is what you're telling me about. I might watch anyways just so I can see your coverage of sysadmins that are fleeing Linux because of System T.
Yes.
I'm going to totally check out episode... Not too far of BSD Now. And producer Q5Sys of the Linux Action Show, he's switched to PC BSD now because he loves that desktop environment. So you're just taking it from me, Alan.
Well, sadly, he'll be able to have that on Puppy Linux if he wants.
Oh, that's true. Well, don't tell him that because he's also you know what he's liking? You know what he's digging on? That ZFS integration. That's what he's liking.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's part of the Lumina has this, ZFS integrated into the file manager.
Yeah, that's great.
With all the great stuff. It looks really nice.
Yeah.
And it's coming along quite well. It's I expected it to be like another year before we saw anything near what they have already.
Right, I did too. I honestly did too. I am super impressed with the speed.
But those two work very hard.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I guess, being based in Qt, they didn't have to do as much plumbing.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to downplay what they've done because it's still really remarkable. But yeah, and I'll give a quick plug for Tech Talk Today, episode 57, the new payphone. We had a really good discussion in the episode with the Mumble Room about the pros and cons of mobile payment systems that are going to be really, once the iPhone 6 ships, probably taking off. NFC based, a lot of it's same what
Android's had that forever, right. But nobody used it.
Right. Well, but see, I think the key differentiator now is, and kind of remarkable,
almost every phone will have it instead of only some phones.
And what Apple implemented in the iPhone 6 does not, or is fully compatible with the Android stuff. So they don't they're not being cut out. Right. So the Android stuff isn't being cut out. So I think now it's really going to take off because you've got all these Android phones that have it and the iPhones that have it, and the merchants don't have to replace any hardware. This is going to be a huge shift in payments. And I'm not sure it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we debated it in episode 57 of Tech Talk Today. And then once it becomes a security nightmare, then we'll discuss it right here in the TechSNAP show. So it's really the circle of coverage on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. But Alan, with all of the news done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv, a subreddit that is not just about your questions, but also submissions for ideas we should discuss in the show. Alan, our first one kind of is in that vein. It's a Hall of Shame submission. It's met the requirements of at least 7 upvotes in the subreddit, but I wanted to give you the final word if we should introduce it to the Hall of Shame. This would be our 11th inductee, which has been a long time since we've introduced anybody. It's egregious, but it's been fixed. Enigmail, a tool I use the hell out of in Thunderbird to encrypt my emails, had a flaw where anyone you sent in the BCC would not get the email encrypted. It would be sent in clear text. But all indications that it was encrypting to them would be displayed to the user. Despite anything you checked in the UI, any prompts that came up on the screen, any messages on the screen, it was actually not encrypting the emails to BCC users for this entire time. Mm-hmm. That's pretty bad.
Well, sorry, the entire time, or is this only since 1.7? It's only since 1.7
okay, good,
was
good.
introduced.
All right.
And it
So
was
take
fixed
that.
in the next one.
So Judge Allen, take that into consideration. It was for a limited time. It was discovered by a college professor who was going to teach it to his class or something like that. It has been submitted to the Hall of Shame with 11 votes. Not a decimating amount of votes, because remember the baseline is 7, but a fair amount of votes. So what do you think, Judge Allen? Should we submit Enigmail to the Hall of Shame?
Sure. I don't know if we have criteria, but I guess, yeah, if you have a mistake, sure. It doesn't really fit the way we normally cover stuff. Normally the Hall of Shame is a person who
was responsible for a massive...
This is more of a bug than a data breach like some of the other ones.
And to be honest,
sure. It is pretty bad.
Verduenda says, and he has an upvote on this. He says, not sure if this really qualifies since it was fixed in version 1.72, which has been rolled out. I cannot say I've noticed any problems with previous versions either.
I did notice with the latest one, it now nags me about the BCCs.
Oh, really?
Because mine's set up to automatically BCC my business partner on every email I send from my company account.
Oh, wow. Look at you.
And we don't encrypt the emails we send to our customers generally, but we sign them. And all emails that come from our ticket system are signed with a separate key for our ticket system. And so because the way the ticket system works is the customer sends an email, it's received by our system, they get an acknowledgement that's signed, and I get their email wrapped to our system and signed. And so when I reply, Ignimail's like, all right, you're replying to a signed email, so you probably want to sign the reply, which is true. But then it'd be like, oh, you're BCCing someone, big scary warning, blah, blah. I'm like, what? Why did this happen last time I rebooted? Now I know why.
Now you know. So, final verdict, we do submit them?
So, in 1.7, they changed the interface around a lot, and it seems they accidentally made it not do what you would expect when you BCC someone.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Number 11? All right, there we go. We have it. We will induct Enigmail, even though Alan and I both use it, into the Hall of Shame with the recognition they have righted their wrong.
I noticed the National Cybersecurity Center of Finland was tracking the bug, and can we have more details?
So thank you to Halifax.
In our replication of the issue, we were using BCC recipients with confirmation enabled. 2 and CC recipients were encrypted as expected, so it was only BCCs that weren't working.
Yeah.
But the original post didn't say that it only happened then, and so they were trying to find out if there was a wider bug or not.
Okay, Alan, our next email comes in from CJ, and let's treat this one as a thought experiment, if we would. He says, hello. And by the way, Slexy, for those of you watching the video version, Slexy decided to participate in the Internet Slowdown Day, but then also forgot to take down their obnoxious loading thing, which is highly distracting. So I apologize. That's going to show up a couple times in today's episode. So CJ writes,
if you click the X, you can.
Yeah, I know, but it's on every tab. He says, hello. Is there a way to set up a mail server that doesn't trust its own disks, or as much as it itself as possible? I want to configure an email server for a few people, but they each have full access to the shared server, so I don't want to leave messages around in plain text or files or even databases. I was wondering if once the mail server comes in over SMTP, if an email comes in over SMTP, hopefully with TLS, it could quickly become an encrypted using private keys for each user. I understand this would give up IMAP support and possibly POP3, but it would ensure that each of our email is only accessible by ourselves. Do you know of any MDA applications that could be configured to do so? So a couple of questions, maybe with the encryption aspect, but also just a mail server that never writes to disk, Alan?
Well, if it never writes to disk, then your mail's not very safe.
RAM disk, maybe?
Yeah. Well,
yeah, but they can still read that.
If the server reboots, all your email is deleted.
Yeah, and if users log in, it would be there.
So, most of the mail server programs like XM or whatever, you call Dovecot to have it write out the email to the mailbox. And so as part of that, you could have an encryption step. When he mentions a private key, he's saying encrypted with the private key. The problem with that is it means the mail server would have everybody's private key. What you probably want is to encrypt with a public key, right? So the server has each user's public key and encrypts their email to the public key, and then only the user with their private key can decrypt it.
Yeah, there you go.
In this particular case, though, depending how you do it, you might be able to still make it work with IMAP. Like, obviously, if you rigged it up so that you're piping their email through GPG, and say encrypting it to their key, then it would still be a valid email at the end. So it might be possible to do it with something like GPG, although I think he was more implying something like regular AES disk encryption. And the problem there is while it's mounted to be able to write to it, it would be accessible to other people on the server. I'm not entirely sure what he's actually trying to get at here. Like, why he wants to do it this way?
Well, he wants to basically have one server, but also have shared shell access.
Have 3 people have root on it, and that somehow keep their emails separate.
Could he be giving them all root? That's the
problem.
problem.
What he says, right?
Don't do that.
He says full access to the shared server.
What about a virtual machine?
Well, I'm not sure what he's after, but
if you could virtualize the mail server and don't give him a login to that.
The point I'm guessing what he's trying to get at is, while he's root, he doesn't want him to be able to read the other guy's email. But that doesn't really work so much.
That's just a perk of the job, buddy.
Wherever you can set up the encryption to happen, you could set it up to not happen or to key off and to give you. It's to store an unencrypted version somewhere else or whatever.
Yeah, CJ, my friend, this is why sysadmins carry a burden, because they have the ability to see this stuff. And when you're root, like Alan says, if you're root, if you really were motivated enough, you would just find a way to bypass the encryption, to work around the encryption. I hope you're not giving each person root access to the server. Please do not do that.
Well, he's saying this is like him and
I don't care.
A couple people.
Nobody. You can give him sudo.
I barely give Stefan root access to my server.
Right? I mean, like, there's certain circumstances where you got to share it. I mean, I understand. There's servers here at the studio, for example, where Rikai and I share root access, and I have no problem with that. But
yeah, I only give Rikai root in a jail.
Well, yeah, they are virtual machines, but with friends, I have never ever done that. I would never do that.
Oh, somebody just mentioned one in the chat room. Apparently, there's something called GPG-Mailgate. Is plugin for postfix that uses GPG to encrypt emails before being sent to the next hop, which I'm guessing if you configure it correctly, you could make it encrypt before it stores to the disk. In this one, it's more trying to do something else along the lines of if you had two separate LANs and you wanted to encrypt the mail traffic between them or something.
Yeah.
But it looks like this Python script might be able to make it so that it would encrypt the emails before it stores them on disk.
All CJ needs to do is go over to DigitalOcean and use Snap September and just do that. I mean, don't put it on the same machine. Because
if you really want them to be completely separate, have your friends run their own mail server on their own separate DO instance, because $5 is only $5.
What I have found in
2 months are free.
In my experience is people really have a disconnect about email. My clients, at least, would have a disconnect about email. Like email is never the thing they would invest time and money in, like hardware wise. And then when email,
what's the biggest deal?
Yeah, and then when email goes down, the company is falling apart. Like they cannot continue. They are losing thousands of dollars per millisecond. It is a tragedy. And I feel like even us as average users I'll build my own mail server. I'll get my wife using it. I'll have my friends and family using this mail server. And then the mail server goes down and they will all crap their pants. And so it might not be worth putting on a shared server. If you're using that server for like a Minecraft server or other things that are going on that server, whatever you have multiple people logging into that server for, maybe email should go on a different server.
Like honestly, that's how it's ended up at even here. Like I set up this one server to do my email. I did a couple other things, but it has since stopped doing those things. And it's a really old server. It's like a Celeron single core 1 gigahertz with 256 megs of RAM. And I've been renting it since 2005, I think. And for the price, I could get much better hardware or like a stupid large VM from somebody. But that machine over there has sat and processed my email for almost 10 years now.
There you go.
When I installed it, it was FreeBSD 6.0. And I've upgraded it in place over SSH without ever making it unbootable all the way up to FreeBSD 9.3.
That's pretty awesome.
So that shows how nice FreeBSD is for upgrading.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Get ready for this one.
But yeah, so I have this separate server that does just my email because part of it, there's not really a special reason to trust that server so much, but it has worked flawlessly for so long.
Right.
Why am I going to mess with it?
So, okay, Alan, let's shift into backup mode. Seth writes in. He says, hey, guys, love the show. I need to set my mom up with the bomb. I want her primary computer, which is a laptop running Windows something, to be backed up to a normal ATX tower system attached to her network. I'm repurposing an old server just for this. I want this to be the final link in her persistent backup solution. She already backups off-site and occasionally via USB drives, all using whatever whacked out Windowsware that's appropriate. But I want her to have the benefits of knowing that her system is being backed up onto a server that's local, unobtrusive, and redundantly built in. In case she wants the server to be able to sustain drive failures and things like that. I'm only experienced in setting up backup solutions for myself. I run Linux only, and I have no shortage of drives I can use for the project. He's got 3 and 4 terabyte drives mostly. So his questions are, because he's going to probably run Linux on this thing, what distro should I use? I have no experience with BSD at all, but I have spent many years on the CLI and have experience managing my own remote dedicated servers. So if you think I should use BSD, then okay, I'll do the learning. What backup solution should I use? And on that system, such as cron-style automated backups, will it require user intervention? Can I have emails in case there's a failure of a disk? I want to have alerts, things like that. This is all running over her own network, so it's all local. It's all going to be plugged into a power strip. And finally, most importantly, I don't live with my mom. And as much as I love seeing her and spending time with her, I want to spend as little time as possible having to go over there and fix and set up and manage your backups. If you guys think I can do it with Linux, I'm pretty confident I'll be able to set up VNC or whatever to jump onto a machine. But I really want this whole thing to run unmanaged 24/7 reliably and with as little on-site participation as possible. Any input you guys have would be awesome. Thanks so much, SkookySprite/7.
There's a couple of different approaches here. Well, people could probably guess that I'd recommend using BSD or whatever. But in particular, if you use FreeNAS, you get the web interface, so you don't really have to know anything about BSD to use it. In a pinch, your mom can use this web interface without being totally lost.
True.
As opposed to a command line.
And Skooky could even load a local FreeNAS VM and walk her through it over the phone if you had to, or something like that.
Exactly. And there's a manual, a big PDF manual that explains it all. Drew writes it, does a very good job. Screenshots all over the place. It's great. And it has the built-in features like emails when things aren't when drives fail and all that kind of stuff. And then for backing up the files to it, there's a couple of different approaches. The one I've taken here at my house is that the data lives on the FreeNAS.
Oh yeah.
Mine's not a FreeNAS. I just have a custom FreeBSD box, but I set up Samba on it and share the files. And so the E drive on my desktop is actually the 12 terabyte of storage I have in my basement. And I just directly write the files there.
Yeah. Like a network drive.
Yeah. And the main reason for that is I only have a pair of 256 gig SSDs mirrored, or 240 gig SSDs mirrored, so I don't have much room on my actual machine.
And plus then when you're...
all of my Steam games run over the network.
Really? Even your Steam... And then you have the benefit from a Windows box of essentially all the back-end features of ZFS.
Exactly. I have snapshots. With FreeNAS, if you set it up just right, you can actually expose the snapshots so it looks like Windows volume shadow copy.
What about... Now, Skooky Spray, what about...
Now, obviously, that's not a backup. That's still only the only copy. So if but you can get rsync for Windows or run it the other way around. If you share the directories you want to back up on the Windows machine, you can have the FreeNAS mount them and run an rsync cron tab.
I got it.
To copy all the files off the Windows machine onto the FreeNAS.
Now you're making it too hard. rsync is great. That could be...
There's also plugins for Spider Oak and Crash Plan, I think.
So here's what he should do. He should totally go FreeNAS on, or I'll just mention too, if you want to stay with Linux, Open Media Vault is essentially FreeNAS. It's pretty great, but it doesn't do ZFS. So go FreeNAS. Then now I'm just going to put this out there. I'm just putting this out there. Install the BitTorrent Sync plugin and install BitTorrent Sync on your mom's computer. You want real-time backup. Here's the other thing.
Does that sync over the network, or does it try to use the internet?
It will do LAN, but but the good part is, if Skooky wanted to maybe have a machine at his house that could be in that sync,
he could trickle replicate it to his storage box.
It would do real-time over the LAN.
Off-site.
Yeah, and then off-site it would sort of do a trickle backup. And BitTorrent Sync on FreeNAS is super easy to set up, and on Windows it's crazy easy to set up. It's easier than Dropbox. So, I mean, that's a slam dunk. I do like rsync could be good. I was wondering if you were going to say Bacula, but maybe that'd be overkill, and it's not exactly real time.
Bacula would definitely be overkill for an installation.
But I love the metal restore feature of Bacula. So if mom's hard drive pops and you put a new hard drive in there, Bacula could get her right back to where she was, a couple of hours before the drive popped. But BitTorrent Sync will totally cover the data. Go into a FreeNAS or Open Media Vault ATX box. I think you're set, Skooky. All right, Alan, our next email comes in from Emmett. And Emmett says, hello, Chris, Alan, and the chat room. I'm a little stuck as what to do. I'm at a new gym, and I was able to get passwordless admin access to the system they use to sign up new customers. I really want to tell them, but I don't want to get in trouble for accessing the system I'm not supposed to. And here's an extra wrinkle. My mom works at the gym. To note, this is a corporate gym like Fitness World or Gold's Gym, so it's big. So how do you find the best person to contact? This is my first time ever doing anything like this. Thanks for the amazing show. I watch TechSNAP, Tech Talk Today, The Place to BSD, Coda Radio, and I just started Unplugged. Emmett. What do you think?
Well, if your mom works there, maybe she can tell you the name of the IT guy.
That's what I was thinking. Hey, Mom, can you give me the IT director's contact info?
Yeah. That's kind of a touchy one, I understand. Although, they have no password. Come on.
The other thing is... it's maybe not a big deal, but don't let...
Mostly, when you're telling them about it, it's, you're not stealing things.
Don't let a ton of time pass. maybe, because then it almost is like, well, why'd you wait so long to tell us? Right. But I think your route is pretty obvious. You go to your mom, you say, hey, Mom, do they have a directory you can get me IT support? IT support will then get you to the directory, and you can say, hello, I'm seriously, they're going to want to hear from you. Just present it as a customer.
Your data's in that database.
Leave your mom out. Just use her to get the contact info, and then like say, hey, Mom, cutting you out of here. Get her out of there, and then go contact them and say, hey, I'm a customer, and I've noticed this thing, and here's what I can do.
If you walk up to this machine and do this, this, and this, you can get access to other customers' information, and you shouldn't be able to.
Yeah. And if they have even half a brain, they'll listen to you. So I don't think you need to worry about it too much. So here's just a little point of interest. Joey writes in. He says, regarding the XP point-of-sale systems you guys were talking about, I do a lot of work for restaurants and bars, and they are far worse than the scenarios you described. You know, those embedded XP point-of-sales boxes. Most of them are running XP on the same network as the public Wi-Fi. Then, in case you are not able to breach them from your own computer, chances are there's an unattended point-of-sale station tucked away in a corner out of sight that's left logged in, which you can install something via USB. I've heard of a few...
They'll have ones, a big touchscreen where the seating charts are.
Oh, yeah.
And the person that stands at that generally walks away to seat somebody and then comes back. So they're gone, like, repeatedly.
Yeah, he says, of course, there's the old-fashioned way. You could just steal the physical card at a particular bar I do work at in our nation's capital, where most of the patrons are running or are working for the government. There's consistently credit cards being left by people who forget them. So you could just walk into the manager's office and grab a box filled with credit cards. Also, maybe you should have a segment similar to Runs Linux called Still Runs XP. I just noticed yesterday that Innova hospitals still do. Where was I? Oh, I was at Safeway, and there was a guy with a laptop doing inventory in the dairy section, and he was using Windows XP, and he caught me like looking at him because I did like one of these like check it out, and then like did a double take because I noticed he's running XP, and then like he noticed my double take. He's like, "Why are you looking at my laptop?" It was awkward. It got weird.
Because you're still running Windows XP.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Alan. Well, that wraps up the feedback segment. So next week, we've got 2 episodes, which means, dear listener, it's all on your shoulders. We're taking that responsibility and putting it on you. Ooh, you feel that weight? Well, we've lived that for 179 episodes, so you come through. Email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Ask us your questions, anything like that. Also, techsnap.reddit.com. You can submit a thread there, and then you'll also get answers from our super smart audience. All right, Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that just didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And a lot of these links were powered by our amazing subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And this week, our first story is kicked off by the one, the only Mr. Brian Krebs, who has blogged about how potentially the FBI was able to locate the Silk Road server. This has been something that a lot of people have wondered since it was obviously on the Tor network. How did the FBI find it and track it back to DPR? Well, according to testimony from the FBI... Oh, hi there. Hello. According to testimony from the FBI, it would appear to be that they were abusing the login system and the CAPTCHA aspect, like the little widget there, leaked the IP address of the server. And they were doing a packet capture. And as they were doing a packet capture and trying different various logins, they got the IP. We'll save. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It depends which capture service they were using and how it worked and some other stuff. But
yeah, so that's
specifically the server. I think the server has to communicate directly with the CAPTCHA people, right?
Yes.
When it generates a CAPTCHA?
Yes.
So the server might have been talking to the CAPTCHA thing without... Well,
okay, not to jump ahead, but 2 stories ahead in the roundup.
Yeah.
Some security analysts, and this guy, last name is Kubervik. He says that he had been testing Silk Road as sort of like a hobby, just to kind of pound on it as an academic sort of research. And when he did analysis, it was his determination that the CAPTCHAs were not being generated by a third-party service. They were coming from the server, and that it never leaked the IP. And in fact, when he recreated the setup that, as he understands it, in a virtual environment, he was still unable to get the IP from it. So he says he doesn't buy the FBI's version at all.
Well, sorry, I guess the way the Krebs example is a reCAPTCHA, which is one where the website would contact reCAPTCHA every time you generate.
But it wasn't a reCAPTCHA.
Right, because in that case, how the setup might have been was they had the back-end servers and then the front-end servers where the Tor was. And so that means the communication of a user visiting the website would go in and out via Tor.
Yeah.
But the communication of that back-end worker node, where the PHP code is executing, would contact reCAPTCHA, and that might have leaked the IP.
It wasn't a reCAPTCHA.
But if they're using just
it was a custom
or whatever.
Yeah. In fact, I tested
their own.
I actually tested it out for Plan B, so I've seen it, and it was obviously self-coded because it would sometimes use words that were like drug related, or things like that. Like it would be weed or things like that. So it was a custom script.
It was one that was like, it wasn't Bark, it was numbers, and they were on a grid, and I was able to write my own thing to hack them. It was quite fun.
So it's interesting. I mean, Krebs has got a good write-up on it, so I will link it if you guys want to read it. He also goes in to talk about how Tor is kind of structured, and he includes a good diagram on it too, which is kind of great. So this is just a good article in general if you're just fascinated by Tor like I am.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Alan. So we talked about.
It was hard to see exactly what happened, but
we have at least a little more in the info, and that's why we put it in the roundup, is because we're still kind of unclear. There's not a lot to do analysis on, but we're following it. We talked about this a little bit before, but here's a little more info on the 18-core Haswell E5 version 3 CPU. Look at here's a diagram of the architecture too.
Yep, because you get quite a bit of other stuff. Quad channel memory instead of dual or triple channel. The new socket, obviously.
Is this implying that the NIC is like wired right to the CPU? Is that what that diagram is?
Well, no, it's part of the chipset, the X99 chipset.
Yeah, okay.
So
essentially,
these are the ones that are built into the motherboard.
Yeah, this is great.
The big thing is the 40 PCIe lanes, which is nice, and the fact that you get 10 SATA 3 ports. Right up until now, we've seen with the Intel ones, you get like 2 or 4 SATA 3 ports, and then a bunch of SATA 2 ports.
Yep.
This is going to give you 10 SATA 3 ports on top of the gigabit NICs, or a dual gigabit or dual 10 gigabit, depending on how you. Yeah. So if you're using the Frontville chips, you get dual 40 gig NICs, and the Springville chips give you dual 1 gigabit NICs.
Sweet.
So that gives you quite some possibilities there.
Huh. They
get some nice pictures of them, and they show also just the speed difference you can get from DDR4 RAM.
Right.
Comparing an E5 2600 with V2 with DDR3 RAM at 1866 versus an E5 2600 V3 with DDR4 at 2133, you see quite a big difference in performance and power. Wow. So you get use less power and less standby current and get more performance.
This is
50% more bandwidth and 50% less power.
This is a CPU to base a great system, or any one of these CPUs from this range, really.
You're more likely to base a desktop, like a gaming rig or something, on the.
I'm kind of a maniac. I might not.
Well, you would be looking at the E5 1600 series then, because.
All right. I'd take that.
Probably not going to put two processors in your machine.
Unless I buy a Mac Pro for video editing.
Right.
These might show up in the Mac Pro.
On the second page, they have a bunch of good ones too. They compare
the
old high end, which was a 2697 V2, which was 12 cores at 2.7 gigahertz, to the new 2699 V3, which is 18 cores at 2.3 gigahertz, and they see about a 1.25x gain, so a 25% speed gain in everything. Although some of the stuff gets up much higher than that.
Yeah.
And they have another one comparing two 10-core E5 2687s versus a single socket 8-core 1680 V3. And you see the big differences there.
Oh man, I think what Intel is telling me is, Chris, it's time to upgrade Jupiter Broadcasting to 4K video. I think that's what they're saying.
Specifically, they're saying this harkens back to when dual-core CPUs first came out, right? And back, you remember when people used to, your only option was to go with like ECC RAM and dual processors if you wanted higher end, and now you don't have to do that quite so much.
Well, we do talk about.
And they have this handy table where they show the prices. They're missing the prices for the top ones, but if you go to arc.intel.com, you can see that the 2699 V3 is $4,111 each. And that's the recommended price. You'll probably pay more for them right now because they're new.
Well, since we already talked about it, I'm going to skip over our next roundup story. And
just one more thing. This is the biggest chip that Intel's made in quite a long time, like physically
big.
Large.
Huh. Interesting.
Because they're huge.
Apparently, there is a way to steal a PIN code. Oh, I'm starting to already put it together using the iPhone camera.
Well, there's this new thermal camera, IR camera you can get that attaches to the back of your iPhone.
Oh, jeez.
And so he showed, there's a video here, and it shows basically standing in line behind some lady at the grocery store. And when she's done, while you're checking out, you surreptitiously take a picture of the PIN panel.
Right.
And from the heat signature, you can tell which buttons he pressed and in what order, most likely.
So he demos it here in this video. Oh, shoot. Yep. Look at this.
And then he also discusses the countermeasure. Specifically, so if you just purposely touch it, like hold your fingers over some buttons you're not going to use while you're typing your PIN, that'll leave a heat signature that will confuse the bad guy.
Afterwards, my hand is slightly colder, but the wall is slightly warmer where I touched it. And as you probably guessed by now, your fingers leave a thermal signature when you type your PIN code into a debit card machine like this. And as you can see, in this case, the PIN code was 12345.
12345. Yes, that's amazing. I got this.
So basically, you would just look at the heat signature and say, okay, well, these are the buttons they touched in this order, and just repeat that.
And depending on the surface and stuff, the heat signature can last like a minute or two. Obviously, if someone else types a new pin on top of the old one, that messes it up. Also, people that would use the same number twice can be confusing because then you wouldn't know what order. But, pins are 4 or 5 digits, right? 6 digits at most. It's pretty easy to try the combinations once you know the numbers.
Yeah. And you could see how someone would just kind of like sneaky like walk up, take a little picture as they
need your card in order to actually do this. But if you think, outdoor ATM at night or whatever, you wait behind somebody, figure out their PIN, and then quickly catch up to them and steal their card.
Yeah.
Bug them or whatever. But he briefly mentions, but doesn't provide the link, so I went and got it for you. The research that came out about this a couple of years ago, heat of the moment, characterizing the efficacy of thermal camera-based attacks on PIN pads. Now, back when this paper came out, you'd spend $100,000 on like a giant camcorder.
Right.
Now it's $200 for something that slaps on the back of your iPhone and doesn't look out of place.
Wow. I mean, technology just... oh, boy. There's nothing you can do.
They also mentioned that if the PIN pad has metal buttons, the heat dissipates faster and it's reflective, so it doesn't really work against the camera. So a lot of like big ATM machines, especially outdoor ones, will have nice metal buttons. But the little pad at the restaurant or at the grocery store generally has rubber plastic buttons, which will maintain a heat signature. Well, so they recommend, just pressing your hand against a bunch of buttons that without pressing them just to heat them up so that there won't be a signature.
So that would be the practical use. Somebody you're around a lot, you sneaky get a picture of the keypad, and then weeks later, when you're at lunch again or something, you grab the card. And that's the practical use of it.
Yeah, or if you're the waiter or waitress.
Oh my gosh, yes, of course.
Especially like you said, the guy that comes in for lunch every day.
Yeah.
You get his PIN one day, and then when he comes back some other time,
of course,
you quickly
that's
nip out in the front lobby where there's an ATM.
That's the use case right there.
And then just empty a bunch of money out of his account, and then return his card to him.
All right, so Dropbox.
That's why almost every restaurant here now, your credit card never leaves your table. They bring a little wireless portable thing over.
Nice.
You do it right.
Yeah.
Half the time they're like, you swipe the card.
All right.
Here, because we have chip and pin, you stick the card in the bottom, type in your code, wait, take your card out, and then hand the machine back to them.
We got to cover this next story because I know you're a big Dropbox user. Huge Dropbox user over there, Alan.
Never installed it. I know some people that work there now, though.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, they've just published a transparency report, and they say in the current period, January to June of 2014, we have received 268 requests for user information from law enforcement agencies and 0 to 249 national security requests. While that number is small compared to our 300 million users, we treat all requests we receive with serious and scrutinize them to make sure they are satisfying legal requirements. Our transparent report also shows, and this is a key part here, that law enforcement agencies frequently ask us to keep requests secret even when they do not have the legal right to do so. These types of clauses were attached to 80% of subpoenas we received in this reporting period. Our policy is to notify users about requests to their information, so we can push back in cases where agency requests a gag order without the legal right. 80% of the warrants, Alan. You know, we've had a lot of people that have emailed us and said, what's the advantage of Dropbox over a VPS provider like DigitalOcean or Linode or somebody like that? Because they could just go there. This Dropbox is in a bad spot here because obviously they want to keep users' data as private as possible. But you can see how when you get to a certain size, there's just no avoiding this problem.
Right. And, you know, I wouldn't say it was much safer being on a VM because they can, you know, be like, hey, DigitalOcean, here's a subpoena. We want to copy a snapshot of this VM that we can read data off of, and no, you can't tell the guy. And unlike, you know, with the physical hardware, it's more like they subpoena your hard drive and take it away. So the server at least has to be shut down for a certain amount of time for them to clone the hard drive at a minimum.
From a technical standpoint, I agree with you, but from a practical like scale standpoint, like your little VPS that you have is not going to show up on the radar unless you've done something truly egregious. A Dropbox is integrated into a surveillance system.
Partly, but you know, when they're going after a certain person or a certain file or something, then
then they'll come and get you. Of course, you know, when it's your own system, you have
I guess the biggest difference is that if you have Dropbox installed on the laptop that they've seized, then you can subpoena your Dropbox. If you know, if you command line copied some files off of a dedicated server somewhere, they're not going to know that you have a dedicated server in order to bother subpoenaing.
Well, there's that.
The police just aren't going to. They know what Dropbox is. They don't know
whatever custom solution you've built is, which may have file system encryption or
own cloud. They probably understand that.
Right. Yeah. The closer you get to something more mainstream, the easier it is for them to understand and adapt to.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate Dropbox publishing this transparency report. Tip to the hat. Yep. So there's a story going around today that 4.93 million Gmail usernames and passwords have been published. However, Google says there's been no evidence that their systems were compromised. What do you know about this, Alan?
This appears to have come from that large Russian dump that we talked about. Basically, it seems that these credentials were in other databases for other things.
Yeah.
And people, these 5 million people happen to share their password with something else.
Turns out Gmail's popular.
Yeah. And because your Gmail username is your email address, and your email address is often used on other sites when you sign up.
Yep.
If you use the same password on that other site as you did for your Gmail, when they hack that site, they're like, oh, I'm going to try this email address with the password from this site, and oh, look, it worked.
The guy that originally unloaded this, he goes by the name of TVS Kit, and he said that he believes that 60% of the Gmail credentials at the time of the dump were valid.
Right.
How would he know that, Alan?
Well, he tried a sample of them.
You think? You think he just banged on them? And
50 of them and tried them, and oh, look, most of them work.
I guess so.
I did something similar when I found a list of PayPal accounts.
Right.
Like that, right?
So you try a portion of them.
I tried like 4, and it's like all of these work, and they all have money in them, not just empty like most people's PayPal accounts.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of speculation that a lot of these are quite old. Like some of these, like the one guy, when he found his information in there, he's like, that's my password from 2010.
Right.
Other ones we've seen, there is some that are up from like 2012, but these appear to just be, credentials that they got from other databases, and they just happen to be.
However, I saw a tweet from a guy today who was like, yeah, it's cool that the password database is old. Too bad I use my social security number as my Gmail password.
Why would you ever do that?
I don't know, man.
That's like triple dumb.
Yeah, that's all kinds of dumb, but he did it. And so there you go. So I saw that on Twitter and I thought, oh man, that guy's screwed.
I feel sorry for that guy.
Yeah.
But, I suggest everyone point and laugh.
So
if you're doing the same thing, you should stop that immediately.
Don't do that. Don't do that. We've been following this Microsoft story, and it's taken an interesting twist. You'll remember back, there's this there's this conflict between the U.S. government and Microsoft over accessing a user.
They're subpoenaing information
Dublin or whatever
from that's stored in the Microsoft cloud, but it's stored in Europe,
right?
By a European customer, and so Microsoft says the U.S. has no right to that data.
So Microsoft has agreed to a contempt order, a contempt of court order, in order to move things forward with this. So
basically, the court said, no, you have to hand it over, and Microsoft's like, no. And so, yes, there's a big fine, or for an individual person, there's jail time for contempt.
Right, yeah.
Although corporations are exempt from that.
No, they reached a deal with the U.S. government, and they have agreed to be held in contempt of court in order to move this whole issue forward so they can begin the repeal process.
The point of appealing it.
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing. Ars Technica did a good job of pretty kind of summarizing the top 3 kind of outcomes and consequences of this. 1 and 2 are interesting. Number 3 is fascinating. And take it as you will. So number 3, as part of this Microsoft agreeing to a contempt of court order, the parties further agree that the contempt sanctions need not be imposed at this time. The government, however, reserves the right to seek sanctions in addition to contempt order in the case of A, materially changed circumstances in the underlying investigation, or B, the Second Circuit insurance of a mandate in the appeal in this court's order to affirm that Microsoft continues not to comply with it. So in other words, if Microsoft wins, this contempt of court order will never ever, it'll like never been a thing.
Right. They won't actually, so it's like, there's a big fine for this, but we're not going to make you pay it, because if you win the appeal, then we'd have to pay you back, and that's just extra paperwork.
Right. But we might bust it over your head if we need to at some point. Next story in the roundup, someone's threatening to expose the Bitcoin founder, Satoshi Nakamoto, because of things?
So basically, they claim to have hacked his email address, and to have a bunch of his emails going back to 2011 that are sitting in his inbox.
How do they know it's him?
Sorry.
How do they know it's
an email address that he used every time he talked about Bitcoin?
Right? And they went and got that account.
Satoshi@gmx.net or whatever. Yes, and they hacked that account.
Hey, like the guy's name is Jeffrey.
The attacker says his name is Jeffrey. And he also provided one of the Bitcoin forum guys an excerpt from an email that guy had sent to the Bitcoin creator years ago. And so that suggests that the account's been hacked for a while, or the account had been taken over for a while, or the guy has access to all the old emails. So there was some speculation that it was just nobody's heard from this guy, the guy that created Bitcoin for a while. So maybe it was just the email provider expired his account and let someone else register a new account with the same email address. And so that guy would get any new emails that were sent after that time.
Maybe.
But it seems in this case that it might be that he actually broke into the account.
I mean,
he's offering to sell all access to the account for 25 Bitcoins, which is $12,000.
Yes. I love it. I love that he's selling them for Bitcoins. Yeah. Wow. Awesome.
He also says that the creator of Bitcoin was an idiot because the email address is actually an alias for his actual gmx.net account, which is in his real name.
Clearly.
So he claims to know the real name of the founder of Bitcoin as well.
It is an indisputable fact because Jeffrey says so. The inventor of Bitcoin, you heard it here, is an idiot.
He's provided some evidence so far, and if he were to continue to do so, that would...
I think somehow, though, it's going to take more than some bad email decisions to make me believe that the creator of Bitcoin is an idiot. Because I think that guy...
I can understand that he has his regular email address, like, first name dot last name, and he created an alias to use for all this stuff.
Yeah.
Without thinking that, I probably want this to be at much greater arm's length from my my regular account because I'm going to create what Bitcoin became. He probably didn't quite think it was going to be what it was when he created Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm. True.
But, lots of people would like to know what happened to the guy. Is he still alive? And, what his real name is. And this guy claims to know and claims that the guy is still alive and possibly still using his main email address, just not this alias. And so he's also saying that the guy who created Bitcoin should hurry up and run and hide because he's going to expose this data. So that there might be some claim that that's why he's waiting to expose it right away. Because he wants to give the Bitcoin guy time to hide before he tells everybody the guy's real name.
Wow.
Hard to say.
Well, Alan, I got 99 problems, and healthcare.gov is definitely one of them. Hackers have apparently broken in to this amazing institution of American technology.
one server that doesn't have anybody's personal information on it was found to have some malware.
Oh,
it was
no.
a server that was never supposed to be connected to the internet, but somebody connected it to the internet anyway, and it got infected.
That internet, you just can't keep
Now,
it out of
just
stuff.
because this machine shouldn't be connected to the internet shouldn't be an excuse for not, having security on the thing as well, right?
No, apparently you never know when the internet's going to sneak in. It just shows up.
So just because this machine's only on the LAN and not on the internet doesn't mean you shouldn't put some security in place.
Right. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
anyway.
All right, Alan, our next roundup item is a first for the TechSNAP program. It's a story submitted by you.
Well, it's just, I had some thoughts the other day and I wrote them down.
So,
Not much. But so I was using the check depositing app on my phone because that's how I deposit my paycheck. And I noticed that since my new bank, Tangerine, took over, they bought ING Direct in Canada. See, the way ING Direct had an anti-phishing system, and the way it worked was when they set it up, you picked a picture from a set of pictures, like a random thing, and a string of text. So, for example, you could pick a dog or a cat or, a chair or whatever, and then you'd write some text of your own design. So now when I go to some site claiming to be ING Direct or whatever, if it doesn't show that picture and the right string of text, I know it's a fake site, not the real one.
right.
Because the real one knows what picture and what text I picked. The problem is that they seem to have not understood how that worked when they rebuilt the mobile app, because they changed the name of the app, so they had to build a new one, and they changed it around quite a bit. In general, it's a little nicer, but the main thing is that they ask you that information before verifying your password, or after verifying your password. One of them, I forget. But they change the order it happens in, and now I think it's not as good.
Uh-oh. Lay it down,
because
Alan.
can expose the information.
I'm ready for the law of Alan Jude.
Yeah, so ask for the... this is what it does. So they also have the thing where they ask you secret questions. In particular now, they ask you for the answer to your secret question, or one of the secret questions, a random one, before they display the anti-phishing images. So normally the login process is you put in your username, which is a number, in my case. Then it used to be you would get the anti-phishing images, right? So it would be like blah, blah, and then do this. And then after you logged in, it might ask you one of your secret questions before it let you all the way in. Now what it does on the phone is you enter your username, then it asks you a secret question. Then it displays the anti-phishing stuff and the password prompt. So that means before I've seen the anti-phishing stuff, I'm asked to answer my secret question.
Yeah.
So that means that someone who is
Scraping.
phishing
Right.
could make a site that would ask the secret questions. They would get
Right.
the answer because they
Yeah.
hadn't got to the point where
the-
they would fail to display the right images.
So someone could build a fake login page using that part of it.
Right, and they would get, and by just asking a bunch of random questions, they could eventually get the answers to all my secret
You
questions.
think banks would think of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, they had. It was set up properly. But when the new bank bought the old bank and changed it around,
Yeah.
I'm guessing the app developer just put them in a different order,
Right.
not realizing that he was actually...
Well, that's how we do
fundamentally
things here,
weakening the
Alan.
security.
You see, we have a standard model that we follow, that we've developed this app for all of our branches, and we've decided this is the best user experience.
Right. Now, I think mostly it came up because on the website, the phishing images are beside the password box. So the secret question should come after the password box, I think. This is on Ontario, but I don't know why you're asking.
Are you talking to the chat room? Alan?
Oh, he's talking about Vancouver City Bank. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm talking to the chat room.
Oh, Adam from Vancouver, as a matter of fact.
So yeah, but in particular, Tangerine is a internet bank, right? Like my local bank doesn't have they don't have the secret picture, secret text thing at all. So anyway.
All right, Alan. Our next story on the roundup, former lobbyist for the telco industry says that it's too hard to switch ISPs.
Well, he's now the chairman of the FCC.
Oh, right, yes, of course. How could I forget?
Well, it makes a difference when he's saying this, honestly.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm sure, I believe you.
Yes. But yeah, he says that switching ISPs is too hard. And he also says the FCC might think about possibly maybe doing something to help kind of a little maybe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, we should do something to spur competition. And we have no idea what that would be.
Yeah.
And so I guess he's just hoping that the ISPs are going to make it easier to switch because. But basically, he harkens. He's like, I remember the day where you could like sign up with Sprint 1 month and then switch to MCI and then switch to AT&T. It's like, yes, I'm sure everybody loved switching long distance providers every month.
Yeah, that was actually extremely obnoxious. And
Exactly.
I see the problem is
being able to do that, we miss that freedom now because now you're locked in with like 1-year contracts and equipment rental fees and installation fees and cancellation fees and termination fees and
yeah.
It's really hard to change ISPs now.
Yeah.
Well, even mine is like I go to call up to cancel my cable. It's like, yes, we can cancel you 2 months from now. I'm like, no, now.
Yeah.
It's like I waited until I had the replacement before I canceled. So
I'm skeptical of everything this guy says because it's essentially it's like it's he can come out here and say these things, but without taking any actual actions or making any changes. It doesn't do us any good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a bad situation, and it fundamentally comes down to a lack of competition. And I believe that more now than I ever have after watching what Google Fiber has done, and not what Google Fiber itself has done, right? But what all of the ISPs in the area, wherever Google Fiber goes into, what happens? They all upgrade their speeds. They upgrade their speeds and they don't change their prices. All of a sudden, they've got more bandwidth to give to everybody as soon as Google Fiber shows up. And what does that tell you? That tells you that as soon as you put a little competition in that area, those incumbent ISPs are forced to actually innovate and push up the speeds and invest in their network. That's what we need.
Well, most of them, they didn't have to invest anything. They literally just changed the configuration file and the more speed.
Right. You're right about that. All right, Alan, well, I believe that brings us to the end of this show, doesn't it? I think we're all done. So don't forget, we've got the double TechSNAP coming up next week. Join us at 11 a.m. Pacific, which is...
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
No.
Oh, right. Sorry. Autopilot here.
Yeah.
So that's 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC.
That's right. Over at jblive.tv for the video version and jblive.info for the audio version. But if you just want to sit back, relax, and not worry about it, take advantage of our RSS feeds, and then you'll get a new TechSNAP delivered to you every single week. We'll have links to those in the show notes over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Don't forget, we want your emails. Go to Jupiter Broadcasting, click the contact link, and choose TechSNAP from the drop-down. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.